I know y'all see this quiet coyote up. Put him up. No moosing during this panel. For real, though. Okay. Cool. Hi, everybody. So welcome to the final part of Equity Day. We're going to be having a panel where you have the opportunity to ask and also hear a lot of information about different topics. Some of you have submitted questions. I think we're going to parse through most of those first, and then we'll have some really targeted discussions based on a lot of general issues that people want to talk about in debate, as well as how we can more generally approach equity in debate. This panel is going to work in a couple of ways. I'm going to start off by asking questions to the panel. They're going to get to introduce themselves. Please be respectful of their time and their ability to be here and just provide you with information about debate, about themselves, and how we can move forward. At a certain point, at multiple points actually, I'll open up the floor to the audience. Priority to students, because we want to hear questions directly from you about anything you're unsure of. It's also not limited to questions. If there are particular experiences that you wish to share about a particular issue, you can do so. So the way that it would work is I would have a section maybe talking about low income in debate, right? And then right before the final question in that section, I'll be like, hey, after I ask this question, I'm going to open up the floor to the audience. So that way you can think about what you want to say if you want to say it, and the panel will be able to deal with that. Sound good so far? Good? Cool. The other part of this, and it's cheesy, I know, but it's just so people actually pay attention to what's being said. Sometimes these panels get really personal, and you should respect your peers who are here and really expressing themselves, not just the educators who are here on the panel, but also the people who are in the audience. So if someone shares an experience, this doesn't apply to questions, but if someone shares an experience, what I want you to say is, we see you and we hear you. So I'm going to count to 3, and I want us to say that all together, okay? 1, 2, 3. We see you and we hear you. Cool, right? Happens after someone shares something about their particular experience, has an experience and couples it with a question, whatever. I'll probably prompt it if you're unsure about whether to say it or not. The other thing that I will say is that there will be times where maybe the panel makes you feel a little uncomfortable, especially if we touch some really touchy subjects. That being said, Kara will be right outside in case you really need her, and she'll be able to provide you with support that unfortunately we might not be able to do on the panel at this point in time. So if you need her or need to step out or just need to collect yourself, she'll be right outside. Cool. And before we start this panel, I think we have a wonderful person here who has also thought about the ways she and her students have been able to talk about equity in debate and try to create solutions for equity in debate. So Shania Hunt is here to talk about a new initiative that her and the girls from Harvard Westlake have decided to start. So yeah, the floor is yours.
Woo, Shania!
I'm one of the coaches at Harvard Westlake, and over the past couple of months, all the girls on the Harvard Westlake team and the rest of the team as well have decided to create a new advocacy-based website that is a nonprofit aimed at educating, increasing safety, and giving tools and access to more people in debate over the next few years. So I'm going to identify the problem that we're aiming to try to find a solution to, the solution that we have tried to get at, and finally what we're going to give to you guys and what we want you to do. So the problem that we have identified in debate is that debate is not exclusive from any real world problems. In the real world, there's a lot of biases that go against women. We are not seen as persuasive. We are not seen as credible. We are not seen as people who can give ourselves real arguments or defend ourselves. And this does not happen in every instance, but we think it happens more often than it should. And that has seeped its way into debate. It's very obvious. Because the rate of girls dropping out in debate across nearly every activity is so much higher than the rate at which boys drop out. And we think that LD is specifically have a problem with this. I don't think PF is as bad, but it's still pretty bad. Where LD rates are significantly different for dropout rates for girls and for guys. So the solution that we've tried to find is first we aim to educate people on what those biases are and try to give you solutions to how to identify when you fall into the trap of making those biases or when you see other people assuming those biases. The second is we try to give tools and resources to people, specifically targeting women-based literature. So we've done a lot of like card files that we've produced on ecofem and other forms of feminism and so forth. But that also includes general resources such as general card files for the topic, what we think about the new topic ideas, what arguments are like. And finally, we want to give like debaters specific content that is based off of different types of arguments in debate so that you guys can learn regardless of your access to resources within your personal life or within your team so that we can kind of equalize the playing field. So the products that we have created are a blog where we have multiple different humor-driven blog posts as well as content-driven blog posts that do all the things that I've just talked about in terms of the solutions. And we also are trying to give you a lot of different resources like card files. We think that will at least be able to try to equalize the playing field just a little bit. And we think that if we can keep like one girl in debate a little bit longer, then we've done enough. And we obviously want to do more, but that is all that we're really aiming to do. So what I'm here today to tell you is to go look at the Facebook page. It's called Girls Debate, no space. I mean, there is a space actually. It's Girls Space Debate. And then from there, if you go to the About Us, then you can see our Instagram, our email, our webpage. Check out the articles. Check out the resources. We really think it's going to vamp up a little bit more during the actual season. And we really hope that it's a great tool that everyone can access. So, thanks.
Yeah, so we already see an example of the way in which people in the community are at least trying to find ways in which they can deal with problems of equity in debate. That is a very specific issue in the context of women in debate, but what we want to reveal with this panel as well as your ideas is that it can be so much more and you can reach a lot of people. You'd be surprised with the capacity that you have to be able to influence the debate community. That being said, let's really get into the panel. So the way that I want everyone to introduce themselves on the panel is you will say your name, and the first question that I want to just ask is, what does identity mean to you? And let's confine it to about a minute. You can start.
Okay, hi, I'm Rebecca Kuang. I'm Chinese American and female. And that's my identity. It impacts my life in various ways.
I'm Kim Hsun, I guess. I'm Taiwanese, Chinese American, kind of. I think identity is basically just the labels of in social identities that will, I guess, affect you in the way that you are treated socially and perceived in the world. And that obviously, as a woman of color in America, that influences me in a lot of ways. Yeah.
I'm Naba. I'm a PF instructor. I am a Pakistani American Muslim female living in America, which obviously has a lot of implications. I think identity is basically just how I'm viewed, how I carry myself, and what I care about, I guess, is how I identify. Yeah.
My name is Willie Johnson. I guess in terms of identification, Black and queer, I think identity is more so how you come to know yourself and how you come to understand who you are, right? So I think identity is not something that is simply categorized or labeled, but identity is more so an expression.
Hi, I'm Heaven. Hi. Okay, that was much better.
Why did she get that?
Again, I think identity means to me whatever you want your identity to be, right? So the question, what does identity mean to you, is an important question, but I also think that the answers kind of have no value to them, because I can tell you what my identity is, but that wouldn't shape your identity, right? Or it wouldn't shape your thought of identity, right? And I don't think that identity should be categorized or identity should be forced upon people. So if you want to be a unicorn with purple glitter, then that's your identity, right? And I think that identities are what you make them.
Hi, I'm Devon. I am a Hispanic male living in the United States. I often appear somewhat ethnically ambiguous, so oftentimes I get to see what other people view me as or what they perceive my identity to be. So it's been interesting for me to notice the difference in treatment that I get based off of what other people think my identity is. But much like some of the other some of the other comments people have made about identity. I think it's something that's inherently internal, but it's performed externally, and then that is what gives people the impression of what your identity is. But at the end of the day, the identity that matters is like the internal aspect of it.
Hi, I'm Megan. I would agree largely with everyone. I think that identity is how you see the world, what characteristics you value that shape your worldview or what you care about, what you think is important, but also I think tied into that is how people view you. And sometimes, actually a large amount of the time, you can't control that. So I'm a white woman, and there's a lot of privilege that I get associated with my whiteness, but also disadvantages associated with being a woman as opposed to a man or someone else.
Cool. Yeah. So I think you all brought up some really interesting points about identity, and I think Devon brought up a good point about the ways in which other people can somehow see your identity and project particular things based on who you are. And I think this segues into some of the more introductory questions that we got throughout the day. And if it is a question of how other people see your identity, they're going to treat you a particular way. I wanted to ask a specific question about microaggressions that we got from those who went around in rotation today. And the question was, do microaggressions need to be racial in nature in order to be qualified as microaggressions, or are they supposed to be something more? And I'll take 3 responses from anyone who wants it.
Yeah, I think that so there's a couple issues with that question. I think this is a wonderful, excellent question that explores the idea of microaggressions. Like, again, if identities are made up upon you and the microaggressions are oppressions that form in different ways that affect your intersectionalities of your identity, that goes with the same way of microaggressions, right? So microaggressions is the way you perceive oppression to be, right? I can't tell you hey, that's a microaggression. It's all about you and your identity. Now, the issue with the question is, does microaggressions have to be more is the issue that I'm having with, right? So the idea that microaggression sometimes is normally correlated with racial issues is not something that should be more to it, right? That the idea is that microaggressions are conflated with racial issues, and that should be something that's a problem, right? And I think that if microaggressions extend out of racial issues, which they normally do, with your intersectionalities, whether it be because you're a woman, whether it be because you're a debater, whatever the intersectionality is that causes that oppression, then all microaggressions are on the same playing field, that they're all brutally bad and should not be done.
I think maybe we should explain what microaggressions are.
Yeah.
For anybody who doesn't know what microaggressions are, they're basically the idea of somebody saying or doing something that seems like it might be more subtle or subconscious that affects you in a negative way based on your identity. So that could be questions that somebody might find offensive or oppressive, or other comments like that. So they're less outright, which is why people don't normally consider them as important, but microaggressions are as important and we should be talking about them, but that's essentially what they are.
Right. So microaggressions can range from someone being oh, wow, you're really smart for a girl. Or it can also be something oh, you're really cute for a Mexican, or something like that, right? Which sounds egregious for some of us, but also sometimes people don't see that subtle way of giving backhanded compliments can often be seen as a little form of diminishing someone's value based on their identity. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think particularly when thinking about microaggression, you have to think about the energy that goes into being in different places for people, right? So the more oppressed you are, the more energy you have to give in, and microaggressions are those constant attacks, right? A lot of people articulate those microaggressions to battle fatigue, the same thing soldiers go through, right? So what happens is that every instance of a microaggression is a little bit more energy lost, right? So you leave from some cases with less energy than normal because you're at a different position, you're low income, you're black, you have a particular gender, right? So it becomes hard for you to maintain energy when your energy is being absorbed or being taken from you because of constant attacks via microaggressions, right? Constant attacks because the institution doesn't respect you. Constant attacks because your coworkers or your peers don't respect you, right? So microaggressions is that taking and that stealing of your energy time and time again to the point where you don't have energy, so you go home and you're completely tired, not because you've done a bunch of labor, but more so because you've labored psychologically to deal with the ways in which you are attacked. Even if it seems so small or so minuscule, right, it's still an attack.
Right. Yeah. And I think those are like pretty good articulations of the ways in which microaggressions function. And I know some of you talked about how microaggressions, even though they might be subtle and might be small, they still have a large impact on the ways in which individuals might exist or the ways in which individuals might orient themselves. So I wanted to also talk about some more larger structural issues. A lot of times in debate, people pretend that they're quote unquote woke or understand a lot of issues, but I think we got some interesting questions about the ways in which we talk about oppression in the context of different groups, and I would like the panel to give like some of the more like most basic responses to these questions that I'm about to ask, and I'm going to put them in one. So the first one is, what exactly do we mean in the context of feminism when we talk about the patriarchy? And coupled with that is, when we talk about the patriarchy, why don't we talk about things like masculinism or what it means to be a man in that particular context? And you can like kind of think about that for a second, but condensing it is, what is the patriarchy and why don't we talk about things like masculinism or what it means to be masculine or men, etc.?
Yeah. So what I think is meant by the patriarchy is the collection of systems that systematically advantage men. It's a bunch of small things. Like, if microaggressions is the negative form, then it's like micro reverse aggressions is like the systems that push up men in every single aspect. So it's things like having a masculine sounding name on a resume, or like pictures, or just interactions with people that systematically advantage men and make people more likely to support or believe or whatever it may be towards men. So there's lots of advantages that men inherently have, whether it be like power structures or just like in everyday conversations. So I think that is what is meant by the patriarchy. And oftentimes, the reason why I don't think we discuss masculinism is like we don't use that terminology. We talk about feminism is because, first off, feminism is meant to address men's issues as well. It's not just for women. This is a huge misconception. It is the idea that if there are two major groups of people, okay, that's also like very exclusionary to like non-gender binary conforming people, but also assuming that there's men and women, then if one group is far more disadvantaged than the other, then the priority should be made to focus on the group that is disadvantaged rather than continuing to prop up the group that is advantaged. Because there are systematic advantages that already advantage men, not to discount all men's issues, it is to focus on women's issues first, because those are the ones that often go ignored. The focus on masculinism is, if anything, seems to me to be a symptom of patriarchal influences, right? The fact that you're wondering why there's no male version of feminism is a symptom of patriarchy in and of itself.
Preach.
Yeah. Okay. I also wanted to hear, so I'll take Willie and Rebecca.
I'll be real quick. I'm gonna flip a James Brown script, right? It's a man's world, but it means nothing about a woman, right? I think what it does is that it's to presume that like this world is built and shaped by men, right? It's the notion of like masculinity, not necessarily men in general, but more so masculinity, and how things like war, things like conscription, things like violence particularly is located in like these like kind of notions of masculinity, or what it means to be a projection of masculinity, right? I think particularly when we talk about the other part of it, but it means nothing about a woman, talks about the ways in which we devalue and we sort of domesticate the particular like notion of like feminine identity, and more so how feminism, right, in itself, or feminine, I guess you can say, projection, right, is uniquely domesticated. It's usually undervalued, and it's usually what props up society, right? That it means nothing in this world without the ability to do things like reproduce, stuff like that, even though that's not what patriarchy is really a critique of, right? But it's more so just how we determine things like masculinity and femininity, right? And I think that our system and our world is shaped largely around masculinity, but the ways in which we cope with the violence, the ways in which we cope with the war is through kind of feminine practices, right? So I think that like we need to look at how the world is shaped to privilege, masculine concepts and masculine views, and then how those that are feminized views are usually denied or repressed. And I think that's what we should look at when we're thinking about patriarchy versus masculininism.
We also have to be a little bit more precise in like our academic terminology here. So theories about patriarchy are not necessarily like this is one group versus another group, men versus women, but rather a criticism of this hyper-masculine ideal, which is somebody who's like physically able, like probably European, white, like very macho, has a deep voice, right? And there are many, many men who do not conform to that. Oh, they're also straight. Is this like perfect man according to like theories of masculinity? And like the theorists who write about, I guess, like third wave feminism are like we fall in a spectrum of conforming to that standard. So like gay men don't conform to that standard, right? Like men with like really high voices or like physically disabled men do not conform to that standard. And like obviously like women are perceived to be even more opposite to that. But that's why like feminism is not just like, oh, we need to care about women's rights. It's really about anybody who does not conform to that standard is disadvantaged in some way by the patriarchy. And so like that's the theory that accounts for anybody who doesn't fall clearly on the lines of this gender binary. Does that make sense?
Devon, Naba, and then
yeah, this like has nothing to do with this question, but like some of you are like looking out your phones, taking Snapchat pictures, and this goes for staff members too. Like it's really important that you don't do that during these topics and these conversations, because that just proves why we need to have these conversations. That when you pull out your phone, that just proves that like you don't care about these situations, right? These obviously are important enough for we to send the whole entire camp here and the whole entire staff to be here. And also just for the staff members, like kids are watching you when you do that type of stuff. So please look at least engaged, because it kind of like buggy.
Thank you. All right, Naba, before we everyone copied my snapping thing. I like y'all.
Yeah, so just expanding a little bit and simplifying what Rebecca was saying, essentially all that feminism is trying to do is eliminate that, or not eliminate, but take down that ideal that everybody needs to be incredibly hypermasculine and that is the best and the ideal, because really there are very few, if any, men or people who identify as men who actually achieve all of those standards, right? A lot of the stereotypes that men say they face, like the fact that they shouldn't be emotional, things like that, those are things that feminism is trying to fix, right? So on top of trying to elevate, like to achieve equality for women, feminism also includes trying to erase all of those stereotypes for everybody.
Right, yeah. And I think you all gave really awesome, enthusiastic responses and like respectful responses to not only break down what we think the patriarchy means, at least in the context of literature or experiences that we've had, but why exactly we don't use terms like masculinism. Oftentimes that's associated with things that are more explicitly targeting women or having a kind of bastardized version of what feminism is. But that being said, we talked a lot about, why microaggressions are bad, why things like the patriarchy are bad, and it seems like most people wouldn't want to be perpetuating these systems or causing a lot of harm. So my next question is more specific in the context of debate. Obviously, we've seen an influx as well as people being more comfortable talking about issues of oppression in debate, be it racism, sexism, homophobia, all these different things. So when someone presents an argument like that in a round, how do you deal with those arguments without also sounding racist, sexist, homophobic, etc.? I'll take 3 responses. Yeah.
I think that a key part of any kind of debate round, but especially in these situations, if you don't check yourself, some of your implicit bias will inevitably come through in your argumentation, is that you need to seek first to understand their argument and then to respond to the argument. So sometimes understanding their argument is like asking cross-ex questions that are like not antagonistic, but like you're genuinely trying to understand. Sometimes that also means like preparing yourself before the round and maybe like read something from the type of literature that they're talking about so that you don't oversimplify it or kind of twist it for the purpose of a debate round. I think in addition, you should just always try to better understand your argument, because that makes it so you can make better responses. So I think oftentimes the issue is people will run positions that are a little out of what we consider normal, and then we just automatically, like, people think it's bad. But if you just try and understand where they're coming from and try to show that you have to disagree because you're the other side, you appreciate what they're saying, and you're willing to, like, honestly and meaningfully engage in that, which also involves, like, checking yourself in terms of the types of argumentation you make. I think that is really the core of those types of arguments, is that they want engagement, a discussion, and I think that in a debate, that is the least you could give them.
Wait, real quick, pause. After I take like around 2 responses from the panel, I'm going to open up the floor to you all. What I want you to think about are either times where maybe you've dealt with microaggressions in debate and you want to learn about better ways to be able to deal with that, or any questions that you have more so about maybe the content that you've got in modules today, more general questions about maybe theories that were brought up, issues that were brought up, or if you feel like it falls into the general realm of what we're discussing right now, now would be the time for you to kind of think about those questions. So as soon as this is done, you can voice your thoughts, etc.
Well, by this time, we should all know, like, there are 3 parts of an argument. The last one is the impact. So in the context of, like, debate arguments and, like, debate structures, one thing that you want to do is that, like, you're able to engage in, like, high theorization, right? Like, you're able to do that. The thing that you don't want to do is attack the impact, right? Like, you don't want to be like, racism good, sexism's good, right? Those are things you don't want to do, and turning the classification of an impact is a... Right, so you don't want to do like impact terms to these type of arguments, but maybe you want to make arguments like no link, internal link terms, or maybe you want to have like arguments that prove those theorizations to be wrong, right? Because, for example, if you're like, hey, you know, Afro-pessimism, for example, or like queer theory is all fun and dandy, right? But this argument is illogical at this point right here, right? So that way, and also throughout the debate, you also want to make it clear that like, I'm not disproving your impact, I'm just disproving the theory. Right, because that's 2 different things. Don't be afraid to ask questions. Don't be afraid to engage in an argument. Don't be afraid to engage with the debate, because that's what separates good debaters from great debaters.
Yep. Did anyone else want to add to that?
I want to just add one thing. Yeah, sure. Another thing is like everyone thinks like there's like one debater, right? Not debater, one author who like writes about queer theory, or one author that writes about critical race theory. There are a myriad of authors, and they disagree with one another. So there is a response to that author's argument that is like rooted in like academic or like some reasoning that someone else probably writes about. There are like lots of discussions going on in literature that you can find. It's not like if they're running queer theory, it must be this queer theorist saying this one thing. So there are different ways to approach different types of impacts and say, no, actually, this would be a better approach to that kind of negative thing happening in society, or your approach is problematic for these reasons.
Real quickly, right? Don't be lazy. Be a good intellectual, right? Be informed, right? Just be like, oh, I have this block that might work. It means it probably doesn't work, right? Ideally is that, like, you want to be informed, right? You learn hearing a new thing, maybe you'll take a loss, but that doesn't mean that, like, you need to go and destroy this argument. That means that you need a better comprehension of this argument, right? And sometimes that better comprehension allows you to destroy the argument. But just, again, don't be lazy intellectuals. Be informed.
One of the side notes that I want to add is that, like, there's multiple staff members that are there at Socrates Hour to help you with these type of things. Like, I'm always at Socrates Hour with a mint tea in my face, but you can always just walk up. I'm normally in the corner with Moni. Raise your hand. Hi. So yeah, I'm normally either with her or the tall John. So yeah, and the other 2 of my mentees, I'm either with them. If you see those 2 kids, you'll see me right there, and you can always come and ask me questions about these things. I'm always willing to help.
Right. Use the staff and the resources that we have here. And also that doesn't just stop at Socrates Hours. You can definitely like hit us up, ask us particular questions, especially if you know like a lot of us has really like gone in depth in those types of argumentation. It's a wonderful opportunity for you to be able to do so. As we learned during student orientation, we're going to be like VBI fam. We will offer you the help that you need as long as it's reasonable, and we will provide you with whatever insight that you need. So as I said, I'm going to open up the floor to students who really want to ask questions or express an experience, anything along those lines. Now would be the time if you would like to do so.
Someone in the back, I'm not sure who that is. Rod, you have a question? You sure?
All right. Yeah, what's up?
I want to know what the reason or rationale was why we didn't include instances of like income inequality into the workshop.
Oh yeah. So actually, there are a lot of questions that are going to focus on low income. It's because we have a really big camp and not enough staff to teach low income, but we have like a decent amount of us on this panel who would be able to answer that. So we'll be talking about low income, lone wolfing, how you should be able to start teams at schools that don't necessarily have a lot of debate funding. All of that will definitely come. Is there a particular experience that you wanted to mention now? Or cool, we will definitely talk about that. Yeah, sure.
All right. Can you ever contest whether or not, or contest may be a strong word, but can you ever disagree with somebody about whether or not something is a microaggression?
Well, that's a really good question, but I don't think that you should, because again, so if microaggressions are about like the oppression that you face based off of your identity, so again, you may think something is small to them, but in a classification, if a microaggression is a little wave of oppression that happens against someone with their identity, you can't measure like, well, that's what you think, but I think this about oppression, right? So like oppression is based off the person that's inflicting, like that's been afflicted by the oppression. So if they feel like it's a microaggression, and it probably was a microaggression towards them. But it could, like, so the next person could happen the same thing, and they might not think it's a microaggression, but again, it's all about like internal, your own identity.
Right. Also, when it comes to microaggressions, there's a lot of difference between, like, for example, individually, I can have particular microaggressions that are completely different from Sunhee, but then at the same time that we can both feel microaggression at the same time because we share certain things, right? So, like, it's a really hard line to be like, no, you're incorrect, right, on that level, but it's also not necessarily means a justification like, oh, I should shut up, but you should also be in that moment where you're like, please explain to me, right? Why is it a microaggression, right? Like, and sometimes for people, they don't want to do this. Sometimes I just don't have the energy to want to explain to you why I'm upset about what you said or whatever the case is, right? But that doesn't mean that later on we can explore the particular situation, right? So if someone says it's a microaggression, I wouldn't just leave it at there. I would try to be more informed so I don't make the mistake again.
For sure. So I guess I'll answer my question a little bit more specifically. I understand that, like, in the moment you should be self-reflective, try and understand the points they are trying to make. My question is more so if you believe, and this is true, that there are some false accusations and microaggressions, right? It's not like every accusation is like made out of good intent, right? I've personally been in scenarios where people intentionally use those as political props in order to get their agenda across or get their point across. And that's not like the ideal way, obviously, these conversations or dialogues should occur, but it has happened. In those scenarios, what do I do when somebody, I feel like, although I have no like cause or reason to believe other than like, I don't have a reason to believe that they're doing this out of good intent, and I have good reason to believe they're doing it out of bad intent. How do I have that conversation without, you know, obviously trying to be dismissive of their case?
Okay, so
Okay, Rebecca, Heaven, Willie, and then student questions. Okay, go.
I think that, like, yeah, maybe there are really rare cases in which you want to be like, they are, like, being manipulative or, like, have some other agenda in claiming something as a microaggression. But, like, as a general rule, you should err on the side of believing the marginalized group's account of whether or not they believe it's a microaggression, versus whether you believe it is. Only because, like, epistemologically, you cannot access their experience, right? Like, there is no way for you to know how they feel, so you can't just be like, I imagined for a moment that I was black, and if I were black, this is how I would think about it. Like you never want to be the person, like, fighting someone on whether something's actually oppressive. Like, if I called Sunhee the N-word, and she was like, that's not okay, like, I don't want to be in a position where I'm like, well, if you're allowed to say it, why am I not, right? Like, if I were black, I would totally be okay with it, because I have no idea what that experience is like. So you should err on the side of believing that person rather than trying to infer, because you just can't.
I just want to emphasize on what Willie said, and that instinct, when that instant when you feel like, hey, like, I don't think this is a microaggression, and you're trying to do political propaganda against me because of microaggressions, even though that, I don't know. But I feel like at that moment, then you don't want to be the person that be like, no, it's not, you're wrong. No, you want to be the person that be like, well, hey, how is it a microaggression? Please explain to me so further on I won't do it.
Justify your warrant.
Yeah, and another thing is that, like, just like a lot of times and oftentimes that like microaggressions happen and a lot of people just like don't know. So like that part of education is important, right? And obviously like at that point you've learned and moved on from your mistake, right? Like a lot of people, when you do a microaggression, they're not going to be like, don't ever talk to me again, get out of my face, you're done, right? No one's going to do that, right? So maybe like if you just be like, hey, like how did I do that, and then like move on from there and learn and grow from that.
Sure. So
Wait,
I don't mean to consume.
I'm sorry, but you are. So I'm gonna take. Can we come back to it?
Yes.
Thank you. Sorry. All right. Sorry. So we're gonna take some student questions first. If we have time near the end, because we started 30 minutes late, definitely we'll come back to that. We'll also have conversations as a staff, but student conversations. If someone wanted to mention something, yeah.
What are your experiences like? Because we're always talking about like racism against blacks or sexism against women, but what are the unique experiences of, say, Asian people or specifically Asian women?
Yeah, definitely. So, yes, speak to that. Go.
Okay, first of all, if you look around the room, almost like half this room is Asian. So I feel like whenever we talk about Asians in debate, you should really check your privilege, because in academic settings, Asians are typically not, or are very accounted for, and are typically not excluded, right? So I think though, if we want to talk about Asian American or Asian importance, you could talk about immigrant stuff, right? Because a lot of times, a lot of people who come to debate have they have like little literacy of English, right? So kind of keeping account some of the things like grammar or some of the things that we do that are very English based, just kind of keeping into account immigrant experiences. Or you can talk about Asian experiences that are not necessarily academic or that are not necessarily represented in academics, right? So people from Southeast Asia, there are a lot less like Filipino people in academic settings and in debate than there are, say, Chinese people or Korean people, right? But typically I feel like whenever we talk about Asian American experiences, it seems as if Asian people just kind of want to join some kind of like minority type argument. However, like you should always take into account that it is not that hard to be Asian in debate. I'm sorry. It just isn't.
Or this type of Asian.
Yeah.
Those are both.
Yeah, like South Asian.
Very
East
overrepresented.
Asian. Like, look around.
But I feel like, I don't know, I feel like...
It's also important to recognize that, like, though there are unique issues within Asian American, especially for like South Asian communities that get overlooked, like you cannot possibly equate this to the black experience. Like Asian culture is anti-black AF. Like it is horrific how racist Asians are towards black. Like there are television ads in China featuring washing machines where like a lady puts her black boyfriend in and he comes out white, right? Like I read an article a couple days ago that the new like fad for Chinese advertising is to have like African children like chanting the slogan of the company. Like there is just like, yeah. Our culture is racist, guys. Sorry, it just recognize that, and do not try to answer like cases about racism by saying, "But I'm Asian, therefore, like POC solidarity, like I'm one of you," because that's not how it works.
I definitely agree with like the comments made in relationship to it, but I think that there is some level of scholarship and theory that is offered for Asian identities and people who identify as Asian in the community in debate, right? I think that the myth of the minority argument is a good example of that, and just more so how like stereotypes drive particular forms of violence against other racial categories, right? I think another thing is the assimilation theory, right? Is a lot of Asian Americans, right, or a lot of Asians who migrate to America and Asian Americans, right, are seen as assimilating, right, which is one, it produces these kind of notions of like what the Asian identity means in reference to whiteness, so it becomes this kind of like Asian identity as a feminized subject, right? Or you have the other thing where Asian identity is only seen as a backdrop thing, where like Asian people only are part of the academy or only are part of this particular labor force, right? And it doesn't see that like Asians are a important intrinsic part of like American society. So I think those are good spaces to, if you want to talk about Asian identity, to look into.
Yeah, like I think Willie's right. Like obviously there are lots of things, but the whole point is just that like the reason why we didn't have like a workshop or anything for Asian Americans is because these narratives are things that we talk about all the time, considering that Asian representation is not at a low in debate.
Yeah. Cool. So I'm going to take one more student, and then I'm going to move on to the next section. Yeah, what's up?
Okay, so generally, like, I understand why intersectionality is extremely important because it allows groups to join together. But I identify as Jewish, and recently we've seen kind of the rise of like conflating Judaism with Zionism, and therefore like anti-Zionist groups targeting Jews, like we've seen, in the Pride Parade in Seattle. We saw 2 people picked out with pride flags with Jewish stars on them. We saw like one of the largest feminist college movements like voting to like associate themselves with like the BDS movement. So as a Jew who also identifies as a Zionist, how do I support these movements without sacrificing my own identity?
A lot of times you are put in a position like where your intersectionalities will contradict with each other, or you're put in a position where sometimes your intersectionalities will conflate. So, for example, I'm a black queer woman, and sometimes like my queer identity like conflicts with like parts of the black community that's homophobic, right? So then it becomes a question of like, what part of my identity do I sacrifice? What part of my group did I go to? In those instances, again, sometimes it's okay to just be like, I'm just gonna step away from both. Right? And like sometimes it's okay to find your own revolution that allows for you to be included, or sometimes it's okay to spark your own revolution for those intersectionalities, right? And that's how revolutions get started in the first place. There's always someone that feels as though like some revolutions are not particular, or some revolutions are not safe spaces for other people. And I think that like was an important question, because there's always intersectionalities that get glossed over and we never hear their side of oppression. So I really want to say that was a really good question.
Yeah.
Jonathan Horowitz knows a lot about this.
Oh yeah, where'd he go?
Horowitz?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So something else that I want to point out, specifically in terms of Jewish identities and allying with social movements, is that Jews are specifically in a very weird and unique position in relation to other groups. Can everybody see me?
Not everyone can see you, but I think they can hear you.
Core. All right, yes. Something else that I want to point out specifically when it comes to Jews and other groups is that we're in a unique position as Jews in relation to other movements for a couple of reasons. The first one is that Jews are one of the few minority groups that have been historically oppressed that can very easily pass for white or are white. I'd say I'm white as an Ashkenazi Jew, but also there are many different Jews of color, or Mizrahi Jews, who are Jews from Middle Eastern countries that very much are not white and very much treated as not white. And the other thing that's unique about the Jewish experience is the relationship that Jews have to power, which is different than other oppressions. So anti-Semitism specifically works in the way of it lets Jews become rich and successful as compared to the boot that stomped on a lot of other groups as a means of cooling off peasants. This is particularly true in Europe, where peasants, what they would do was they would worry about the Jewish person who was collecting their taxes as compared to worrying about the duke who was actually in the castle getting all the taxes and getting all the money, so that when people got pissed off about the tax burden going up, they blamed the Jewish tax collector and not the lord who, got the taxes. And then they killed all the Jews and didn't let the power relationship stay in place. Mm-hmm. So that's something that's really important that we need to have context. The other thing specifically is that Jews and allying with different movements is like a very complicated thing that honestly I'm going to end up monopolizing all the time if I talk about. So I'm just going to go sit back down, but that's sort of fine. But if anybody wants to have more conversations about the relationship between Judaism and various leftist movements, Judaism and anti-Semitism as an oppression, and how anti-Semitism relates to all other forms of oppression, I love having those conversations. The other thing I want to point out is that actually this shirt is not unintentional. This shirt is part of a movement that I'm a part of that is trying to end the American Jewish community support for the occupation in the West Bank and Gaza. And I want to point out, there's a lot that goes on there, and there's a lot of reasons why I'm wearing this shirt and why I'm a part of that movement.
Cool, thank you. Yeah. points. It seems like, honestly, it does come down to the ways in which it really comes down to the ways in which you decide how you want to go about your understanding of intersectionality, your understanding of what it means to be an advocate, your understanding of what it means to be either an ally or an accomplice, someone who's willing to put themselves forward and on the line for those you really care about protecting. It's up to you, right? And that's a journey that you need to take, and hopefully we can provide you with some people who can mentor you in that and help you with that journey. But it's different for everyone, and I'm glad that we got that extra perspective. So, sake of time, I'm gonna move on to the next section, but it was touched upon in some of the questions. The next section that we're gonna talk about is in the context of low income / lone wolfing, as well as a brief conversation about religion and what it means to have particular forms of your culture not really accounted for in debate and how you go about navigating those spaces, right? So I'm going to just start off with talking about low income in debate, because I think it's always a really interesting issue that a lot of times even people who you might not label as being low income in debate, because we often politicize certain identities and make assumptions that a lot of people in the community do really have to face, because debate is expensive. It's a privileged activity, costs a lot of money, and we have to find different ways to be able to come here and exist in this space. So the first question that I wanted to ask, and it was very specific, but I think it would really entertain this conversation, is if you're a low income student, how do you choose between doing debate and paying the rent or getting a job? So, going to a tournament every weekend takes a lot. And as a low income student, how do you really come to deal with those issues? Anyone want to go first? You can go.
I'll go.
Yeah.
Particularly for me, growing up, being a part of multiple low-income programs, working with multiple low-income programs, right? It's one of the things that I think is most crippling as a high school coach, is that I've lost so many kids because they had to provide for their family instead of being able to do the activity willingly. It's a really hard choice, and it's a choice that I've had to think about multiple times and had to worry about multiple times, right? I think that it is extremely hard to choose between survival and debate, but for a lot of people, debate sort of becomes survival, becomes a strategy or a mechanism that allows you to escape the conditions of society, the crushing kind of impact of poverty, the crushing impact of not feeling like you have enough, right? In the debate activity, right, when we're actually in the room, right, I can compete with you on the same level, right? But then at the same time, there is still that worry in the back of my mind of whether or not I'm going to be able to eat when I come to said tournament, right? I think what gave me a lot of privileges and gave me a lot of opportunities was being a part of an urban debate league, right? It gave me the opportunity to be able to choose debate without having to pay extreme amount of money. And for some people, they don't have the access to these kind of programs, so it's really hard for them to choose one over the other. So I think that it's really important that you kind of go in there with a plan, right? Debate can produce a profit for you. Debate can get you scholarships. Debate can provide you with paying jobs, right? But then at the same time, is that the question becomes is what necessitates your survival? Is it more important to feed your family and get a job, or can you balance those two things, right? I had a really hard time of balancing them in high school and in college, right? Which led me to, in college, quitting a little bit earlier and just working with debaters and then having a job and then going to school at the same time. So there is a balance that you can find in there, right? But then at the same time, that this is something that you should negotiate with your coaches, you should negotiate with your partners, your teammates, and so on and so forth, so that it's not one of those things where it seems like you're not really into debate or you're not really trying to do debate, that you care more about this other thing, right? But it's more so of splitting your time appropriately. And sometimes you can't make that choice. Sometimes you have to take an entire month of debate off just because you need to work those hours, right? That's completely understandable, but you have to understand that your survival is the most important thing, right? And debates sometimes do not feed you. Debates sometimes do not provide you the things you need, but that doesn't mean you give up on the activity, but you find ways in which you can work around it. You find ways in which you can produce for yourself. You find ways in which you can do things like get a small part-time job that gives you at least a little bit of income in order for you to continue an activity that can also provide you with so many benefits.
Just to piggyback off of what Willie said, I think that it's important to note that debate eventually, like if you work hard and like you continue it out and like you, like the issues that you're facing now is never forever, right? Like I went through the same issues, but I found an urban debate league that accepted me and loved me, and then also that there's people that are willing to work with you, right? Like, so obviously, you know, like, okay, well, obviously y'all are getting paid, y'all staff members, but it's more than that, right? Because when I first got out of high school, I was thinking the same thing, right? Like, should I do debate or should I find a job? And eventually I found both, right? And then I got hired by VBI, right? And it allowed for me to grow a family at VBI, and it allows for me to actually pay for things like textbooks, school supplies, and stuff like that. And part of my UDL, they allow for me to pay it for and still get paid for those type of things, right? And like sometimes it's little things like, hey, asking your neighbor to walk a dog, right? And I know you're like, $10, but $10, 10 times, I was about to say 10 times, 10 times a week, that's definitely possible. 10 times a week to like walk a dog eventually leads up to something, right? So I think that like y'all want to take an account of that and take like real like actually go on Tab Room and email those directors of like those tournaments, because sometimes if you email them and say, hey, like I'm a low income student, I can't really afford to go here, but I'm really willing to go to your tournament. If you allow for me to come to your tournament free, I cover everything myself. And a lot of people will work with you because they understand that sometimes people in debate can't actually afford debate.
Yeah, bouncing off what Heaven said, I'm a student who now uses debate to pay his rent, to pay his bills. If not for debate, I really don't know how I would be eating in college now. I basically fund myself by coaching, and that was not something I was expecting to happen coming out of high school debate based off of like my credentials as a debater. But I feel very fortunate to now have had that opportunity. However, as a student, I remember being in specific situations where I debated it myself whether or not I should ask my mom for money to go to this tournament, because I knew all my friends were going and I really wanted to go, and I really felt like I could compete, and I felt like we had great prep, but I just didn't know if I had the heart to like ask my mom for that amount of money to even be able to go to the tournament in the first place. So I think what's really important is for you to remember why you're doing debate in the first place, because it's very easy to get caught up in the whole competitive aspect of it and be like, oh, I need to go to this tournament, I need to go to the next tournament, I need to be at every single tournament in order to get better. But to take a step back and realize why you're in the event in the first place. You're all probably in the event to do it because you like it. As much as you want to say, oh, you're doing it for some other reason, college apps, whatever, you do the event because you like it, and don't try and convince anyone else otherwise. So you have to, oftentimes it's really important to take a step back and realize what you're even doing this for, and view it that way. Also, bouncing off some solutions of what Heaven just said, when I was a debater, I didn't even know you could contact the tournament themselves and like let them know your situation. But there are a lot of people out there, especially tournaments, who are already making loads and loads of money off of you, that if you contact them, let them know your situation, they will be willing to waive lots of your costs. In addition to that, it's not just costs. I know it's not just the tournament attendance fee. It's also the flight. It's the hotel. Contact schools that are like close to you, because lots of schools will be willing to transport you with them, or sometimes they have an odd number of students, so they have an extra bed because all the rooms are always 2 double beds. So they'll put you in a bed there, so you can find ways to get to tournaments for affordable rates by like reaching out and doing the legwork yourself. But you have to know that these things exist, and it's really important to actually do the legwork yourself and do everything you can to if you are really if your goal is to go to that tournament, if that's really what you want to do. But it's important to take a step back and look at your perspective.
Can I add something? So since you guys are at camp, I think it's very important to make friends, right? Your friends can be your resources. I got to go to tournaments because I could stay with my friends, and I know that a lot of lone wolf type debaters get to do that. But personally, I wasn't very low income, but I coach a lot of students who are. And I think that obviously this is a discussion about equity and staying in debate, but there is also no shame in quitting. There are a lot of things that happen, right, that make you not want to stay. It is also not feasible for you sometimes if it's very hard for you, both monetarily and mentally. So never feel pressure to stay in this activity. There is no shame in that. And anybody who shames you for that, either a coach or your peers, and don't think that you have the willpower to stay, is not worth being friends with, because they should understand why you want to quit.
One thing I do want to segue into this, coming from underdeveloped programs, and it was one of the questions that were there, right? It's really hard to maintain a program when you're really holding together with spit and glue, right? It's important to have the people involved in your community know about debate. It's important for you to reach out, because for me, a lot of my debate, particularly in high school, was done without a partner. I was in policy debate, so that's important. Y'all don't know about that. Maybe PF does, right? But without a partner, partner to do that, right, it required me to have a lot of friends. Also, my program was declining both in high school and college, right? So in order to do that, we had to seek help from the community. We had to seek help from people we know were affluent and believe that debate provides potential for people, right? We had to kind of, in a lot of sense, lean on other people, lean on like family and friends also to support the activity. So if you are in I guess you can say, understaffed and underdeveloped program, don't take that as the justification for giving up on your program. I know for sure, I've started 2 programs myself, right, is that it's uniquely important that you are not fighting alone. Right? There's a community that will support you. There are people here that will support you. There are people out there who want to see new programs flourish, because new programs mean more people in the activity, which means they get paid more. So it is important that you look at all the other venues that have, and you don't give up just because you don't have the things, right? If it's an issue of coaching, you have a bunch of people here who will have time, who will try to make time for you in order to provide you with questions or answers. Sometimes you don't need a physical coach. I've done it without a physical coach. But don't give up on the goal. If you want to debate, if you enjoy debate, you have to find the means of justification for it. Don't give up. Again, don't be lazy.
It's like a mix of whatever. All right. Yeah, so I guess just like kind of condensing that a little more, and feel free to like give a more condensed answer, because that was like no, to everyone. If a student wants to start if a student wants to start a program at their school, what do you recommend would be the best steps for them to be able to do that? Sure, it intersects with a lot of the solutions that you all gave as low-income students, but oftentimes it is students themselves who want to start debate teams or change a debate club into a debate team and become like nationally competitive, or not just go to local tournaments, stuff along those lines. So what concrete solutions do you all feel you can like provide to the students if they wanted to go along that endeavor?
I think that like one of the things that you can do is, the first thing that you should do is come up with like a plan, right? Just Google how to come up with like a proposal, a business plan, and you type it out, make sure it looks nice and professional, no typos, none of that. And you go and you try to get some kids, right? And then you get a solid number of kids. Even if you can't get a solid number of kids, then go to the principal and say, hey, I want to start this program, blah, 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 blah. And then some of them might be like, hey, you need a chaperone. Like, staff members will willingly sign up for debate. Like, you get paid on the weekends, you get to go to nice hotels. They're going to want, like, a staff member out of the entire school, at least one of them, even if it has to be the custodian, will come with you and go to those tournaments with you, right? And it's up to you as a team, right? And when you become a team with your debate team, even if it's 3 people, that's still a team. And it's up to y'all to make sure it builds, flourish. And sometimes it's not going to build as quickly as you like to, but you have to just take the first step and initiate that. And hey, it's not too late to start. Start the business plan now. By the time you get back to school, it'll be already ready, and you could just take it there.
Not to be rude, but I kind of don't think teachers are the direct point of line, because when I was in high school, no teacher wanted to do debate. It's a weekend away from family. It's a weekend away from their children. No, the pay is not enough usually in some cases. Or if you're under budget school, you can't pay them, right? One of the things that I think helped me a lot was being able to create a soft petition, right? Having, not necessarily people being like, I would be a part of the team, but having a debate team would be a good thing. Right, that creates kind of the justification for the principal to be like, hey, maybe we should talk about a debate team, right? One of the other things that I think was extremely helpful was having the PTA involved, having parents who believe that even though their students weren't in debate, my mother wasn't a part of the PTA, right? But like other like fathers and mothers believed that like it was important that we have a debate team. So they was one of the biggest push behind and biggest support behind keeping debate alive in high school for me. So looking to like not necessarily the normal routes of going to your principal, stuff like that, also looking at like parents associations, also looking at alumni associations too. Alumni were the reason I continued debating, because one person came to my school and was like, you're not quitting. Yeah. Right? And he literally worked with me the entire like year. Right, coming like every other day just to work with me. So sometimes you'll have people who outreach to you, and sometimes it'll be a hard fight. But again, don't give up on a fight. Just know that there's different routes to go through.
Yeah, and I think what you should kind of take away from some of these things, and if one more person wants to add to that, feel free to as soon as I'm done, is that you are still students at the end of the day. You're still kids, and there's a lot of power in being able to get adults to rally behind you, because schools really love parents, or they really care about what parents think. So even if it's not your parent per se, but you find maybe one of your friends' parents are really involved in school activities and really care about debate, they will be that advocate for you. They will give you the power that you need, because you are a student. You don't need to do all of that legwork by yourself. There are adults who are more than willing to help you. It just becomes a matter of tapping into some of those resources, and I promise you, once you are able to tap into those resources, a lot of the potential to be able to flourish and create something that at least allows for you to sustain yourself will continue into your debate career. But one more person before I move on to the next question.
Really quickly, I think that something that's really important, obviously, is money. So fundraising is also something that is like very plausible, right? Like there are so many things you can do fundraising wise. Everyone wants to buy food at school. I personally funded my way to camp and to tournaments by like selling cookies at school. And I know that's just personally for me, but obviously if you have a lot of people who are interested in it, they can also make money that way. Or just reaching local businesses and asking if they like want an ad, and you can like put stickers on your computer and stuff like that. Those are all things, or just like asking like local lawyers and things like that. It's very likely that you can get money from them because they'll want to support you and get like free advertisement. Yeah, but also I think something to keep in mind in terms of like keeping a lasting program is what we did was we had like a middle school pipeline program. So if your problem is that not enough people are joining debate because they're already involved in some kind of activity like band or orchestra going into high school, right? Something that you can do is just kind of pique interest at other schools around you potentially, and that could help build a program that can last for like multiple generations by the time that you're gone.
All right. After the next question that I ask, you feel free, I'm going to open up the floor again, feel free to ask more specific questions in the context of low income or being a lone wolf debater. Also opening the floor up to anyone who wants to talk about religious or cultural differences that they feel aren't really addressed in debate, and us being able to like specifically talk about those particular issues, right? So the question that I wanted to ask the panel is, sometimes religion gets talked about in debate. Oftentimes it's kind of like a trolley case. I don't know if this is the case in PF, but in LD, sometimes people use like God apps, or they would talk about Islam to justify things like the UBI or something along those lines. But there is no articulation or really interrogation outside of those particular positions that are happening in the debate community. So something I just wanted to explicitly ask is, how do you think debate could be more aware or inclusive to those who are coming from who are more in touch with their religious backgrounds? I know Naba specifically talked about the ways in which your Muslim identity intersects there, so I definitely want you to contribute to this. But yeah, let's just talk about the ways in which debate needs to be more inclusive to people coming from particular religious backgrounds and the obligations that come with that. Yeah.
I'm not religious, I don't know.
You can go.
Okay, so as someone who's not actually particularly that religious, but is Muslim and very culturally almost affiliated with that identity, it comes around a lot in conversation, but it's also definitely something that I identify as a lot because of the political climate and news climate going on right now. So a lot of arguments like that where Islam or Islam or like things like that are brought in as justification for like defending against terrorism and like the logic there. Sometimes that gets very skewed. And then also just, that's more of a cultural, social thing also. I know at least in PF, we don't run that many arguments that are like abstract enough that they talk about the intricacies of religion. Normally when religion's mentioned, it's like in blips, in warrants, things like that. So it's not touched on as in depth. The real conversation happens outside of the round, and that's in terms of social and team identities and stuff. And I think that that's definitely a problem in public forum. I think we should be talking more about issues like that, and not just when it comes to religion, but when it comes to like any of those social problems, we definitely don't go in depth enough. And that can be really hard because if something gets mentioned in a round and it's really offensive to somebody, you don't really get to go in depth because of public forum and the way it's constructed. And I think that's something we should be working on outside of rounds, especially with teams and at practices. When you're writing those arguments talk to your team members about like the warrants you're running, if there's sensitive issues, things like that. So yeah, I think that's definitely something we should be working towards.
This is like a really good analogy here, and just stick with me, right? So like when it comes to arguments about these things, right? So it's fine, right, for like Batman to talk about like issues within like Gotham, right? But like even if he doesn't really experience those like issues within Gotham, right? But it's an issue when like Batman's like, hey, I know what Joker feels like, so I'm going to tell you about how it feels to be Joker, right? Obviously, the Batman won't have like the clear analysis or like really good way to explain like what the Joker feels like. And I know sometimes like you feel more inclined to run arguments because you feel like those arguments are winning, but know your role, right? Know your lane, and like try to stay in those lanes, because you wouldn't want someone else to tell you, right, about how you live your life, or you wouldn't want no one else to tell you about like your dogs, your pets, your cats, and you want to think about that same way in identity and religion. And I know that like these arguments are becoming more popular and more like happy, and LDs are more excited about it, but try to like refrain from those things, right? And sometimes it's okay to find arguments that allow for people that are not with that oppressed group or with not that group to talk about those things. There are also articles out there as to why allies sometimes should have and spark those conversations.
I'd like to also stress that in those situations, like it's not just that you need to not touch those subjects at all. Like if you are going to touch subjects that you think are more complicated or that you don't fully understand, talk to people about them before you run them in a case, or talk to people about them if you know that it might be coming up on the topic, or read about it a little bit. Like stay informed, but also have conversations with people you know who have those identities, or people you know who are more informed about stuff like that. Like it's just important to keep yourself aware. Even if you're in public forum and you know that you won't have to in-depth discuss it in the round, make sure you're doing it enough that you're not like offending people basically when you walk into a room.
Cool. Yeah. So opening up the floor to students. 1 second. Did anyone? Student or staff? Okay, 1 second. Yeah.
Kind of related to like the religious and cultural aspects. In I believe it was in March, we had a PF topic about like it was basically just like the resolve the United States should like continue to pursue a two-state solution. And as a Jew who is a Zionist who believes in the two-state solution, it was really hard for me to debate that topic because I felt very emotionally connected to the topic itself. It was an extremely I was a topic I'm extremely close to and I know a lot about, and so therefore to debate it when I had such strong feelings about it personally was like very hard to do, especially because like from the place I come from, you know, I'm not particularly like religious, but I do identify like very strongly as Jewish, and so therefore like to hear a lot of arguments about like different sides of that when I felt so emotionally connected to the topic was like really hard for me, especially a lot of people talking about like generalizations about like people on both sides. Like that was really hard for me as well. I've been there. I went there the past summer, and so therefore like to be there and like hear all these different like arguments on both sides that I felt so emotionally connected to was really hard for me. But it also made me think about how like these situations are situations that come up are going to come up in real life in the future, especially on things like college campuses and things. So it was important for me to have that experience, like arguing a topic that I felt so emotionally connected to the point where like it was hard for me to actually debate.
Yeah, definitely.
We see you and we hear you. And we definitely hear you.
Yep.
That's definitely something, I'm going to say one more time, sorry, keep it short. I think LD does a much better job of addressing the importance, and I know it's not perfect, but of addressing that things are multifaceted, people can be offended by arguments, some arguments are personally important to people, and Public Forum does a much worse job of that. And I'm not like, I love Public Forum, but we kind of go through issues, people are numbers, everything is cost benefit. So for issues like that actually directly affect people's lives, learn about them, please be aware of them in rounds. And for things that are serious like that, like stereotyping people, doing things like that in rounds as like your warrants and stuff, not really cool. Stay informed. Don't say things in round that you wouldn't like say or believe in real life in that sense, like when it comes to serious social things.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Abed Al-Suleiman, and I'm a Syrian American and a Muslim American, and I guess I just wanted to share a few anecdotes about But just like, so first of all, it makes me really happy whenever I see other Muslims in debate, because for me that's just something I don't see often. And so a lot of the time at tournaments, I hear someone with a vaguely Muslim-sounding name. I'm like, oh my God, are you Muslim? Like, can I get your autograph? and I mean, it's kind of weird initially, I guess, but like, it's always like, I think for me, debate has just been like this eye-opening experience that and like educational, and it's helped me become informed and want to go out into the world and do things. And seeing other Muslims in that forum makes me happy, because it feels like it gives me like a hope for the future of Muslim Americans in the U.S. Muslim Americans, which were redundant, I guess. But anyways, so my first year in PF, there was a topic where my partner and I were like waiting outside, and we were talking to our opponents. As soon as they found out I was Syrian American, they started like pressing it further and telling me about how they wanted to go to the Middle East and kill those terrorists, and how they wanted to join the army, and how their favorite movie was American Sniper. The next day after the family beat them, they cornered my partner and asked him where I was from. Like, I had told them, but whatever. And if I was really an American. And I mean, obviously stuff like that is just like super exclusionary, and I don't think we talk about Islamophobia in debate because it's pretty rare, to be honest, but it's also something that has occurred to me. And then on another topic, which was the refugee topic, I actually lived and worked with refugees for 1.5 years in Turkey, and my family's Syrian, so my family is, like a lot of my family have become refugees. And so this is before I went into LD, so I knew identity politics arguments were a thing. I didn't know how they worked, but I could tell that a lot of arguments were really problematic. Like one time when I was told that Syrians were actually lazy and they wouldn't boost the economy of other countries because they were cowards who ran from their country. And like being given that language through LD was actually like really useful and again eye-opening. And yeah, I think like that's something PF has to address, because I think PF a lot of the time is significantly more blind to that, and there's not really there's not any countermeasures like you have in LD, like the K or anything.
Countermeasures. Yeah. Did another student want to talk? Students? Yeah, what's up?
So like you said, our Canadian culture kind of sucks. Like, like Chinese people are like kind of racist and sexist sometimes. But like as a Chinese person who grew up in a Chinese household, like I still respect my culture and appreciate it. But like, how can I like reconcile some like bad parts of it that I think that are ingrained in me sometimes, and like still like engage with this kind of like ethos, I guess.
I think it's the whole thing that you are not your culture specifically, right? Like your culture informs how you make decisions, how you determine things, but you don't have to be the bad parts of your culture. You can take the good parts of your culture and you can fix or remedy the bad parts of your culture in order for you to produce a better family, right? I.e., growing up, like our parents always like, we want you to be better, right? So we learn from not only like their mistakes, but we also learn from the bad ways in which they engage with other people, right? Of how we want to like project ourselves, right? But also stay strong to our culture, right? There's a lot of things, particularly in like black culture, that is extremely violent, extremely hurtful to like other people, like queer people, for example, in particular, like migrating populations, right? But at the same time, that doesn't mean that I'm going to be uniquely violent towards those people because my culture shows that, right? It's something that I have determined myself, right? Knowing, understanding my culture of things that I need to avoid and things I need to check back when other members of my culture do it.
Yeah, right. Does someone else want to add to that? Cool.
Can I? Yeah.
Yeah, sure.
I guess like adding off of that, I'm like both Chinese and Taiwanese, so like my lab knows I'm always like I hate China, right? But at the same time, right? At the same like there are so many things about my culture that I think you can always love, but it's always just knowing the history and how that affects you, and then finding groups of people that you identify with as well, right? They're especially if you're Asian, right? Asians are they're the most Asians in the world, right? You'll always find a subsection of your population that feels exactly the same way that you do. I know that once I got into debate and once I got into college, I found people who had the same exact experiences as I did, and just finding those things and slowly finding our identity from like talking to people and developing things from knowing your history and talking to your parents is very important.
Yeah, right. And yeah, you brought up some excellent points. It's about to close up the floor because we have about somewhere around like 20 minutes left, so I'm going on to the next section. A lot of you touched upon this idea of, you know, debate, both from the audience as well as the panel, of debate teaching you about particular experiences, and it seems like even though there are a lot of problems with debate and a lot of problems with the way in which people in debate handle particular issues, I just wanted to ask about some bittersweet aspects of debate, i.e. specifically, has there ever been a time where debate has been an escape for you? Was that a good thing, a bad thing, and how was that particular experience?
So debate is always an escape for me, right? Whether it's that I'm learning or whether it's because I'm at debate camp or something like that, and that sometimes escapes are good and sometimes escapes are bad. So for example, sometimes I need to escape away from debate people because sometimes debate people can be toxic, but debate has been bittersweet for me. And like places like VBI and places where you gain friends that like you probably would have never been friends with, right? Like before I debated, I walked past Sunhee every time I saw her, every time, right? And then it's not until you like learn, until you grow into people, right? I don't know where Brianna's at, but before I became her debate partner, I couldn't stand her. So I've never talked to her. Like, I would never talk to her, right? So it's like people like that that makes you want to, you know, become like better people and make you want to continue better, right? And even if like there are little spots in debate, like when Sekou annoys you, or like little things like fire alarms going off in the middle of the night at VBI, it's those little things that you'll be like, you know, that's what I'm going to settle for. I'm going to just bypass the annoying little kids, or I'm going to bypass the annoying little fire alarm, because I love these places, right? Like, for example, if I don't go to debate camp, I would just stay in North New Jersey, right, and be like more prone to violence, like more prone to possibly dying in the streets, right? And these are places where like I can escape and I know that I'm safe, right? When I go to VBI, I know that I would be safe in certain instances rather than my home. So debate is a place for me to escape.
I'll go next. I'll be honest, debate saved my life. When I was away at camp on my sophomore year, one of my closest friends died after coming from like a team party. Basically was shot, killed, and ideally we were like always together, right? So like I feel like I would have been in that same predicament, right? Even though like sometimes I would like to believe that he would be alive if I was there, but it's just still like I think debate was a savior for me, and in a lot of ways debate is a safe space, but also there is bittersweet moments of debate. There's moments and times where I get tired of my team, you know, specifically having being annoying, right? But like debate, yes, there are a lot of bittersweet moments. There are a lot of times where I don't agree with the people that I work with. There's a lot of times I don't agree with like the way in which the culture of debate and the policies and politics of debate function. But that's not a reason for me to foreclose myself from debate, because there's a lot of benefits that I feel I've gotten from debate, and I've also seen other people that I've like have put so much energy and time into gotten out of debate too. So I can't say debate is a bad thing, but yes, it's just escape, and yes, it does have its bittersweet moments, and everything comes with a grain of salt, and you should just know that, and you should just also be able to like reflect and be like, here's some of the pros and cons of debate, and if that list doesn't even out or doesn't equivalate, you then need to make choices, right? Whether or not it is to leave debate because it is so bad for your mental health or so bad for your like, you know, particular situation, right? Sometimes you do need to leave debate, or sometimes you need to take a break, and a break is absolutely fine, right? A break is absolutely fine. Debate is not going to go anywhere. People love it too much. Y'all all here.
I think it's really important for people to have like a life outside of debate, right? I mean, I say that jokingly.
Sometimes, I don't know.
I said that jokingly, right? But I've been doing debate since I was in 7th grade, so it's kind of all I know. But at the same time, I always need to take a break because I had my own circle of friends that helps me like vent about my debate problems in a vacuum, or helps me talk about things outside of debate. And so like debate is very important. I'm very happy that I did debate, and I'm very happy that I have these skills. But at the same time, always having a safe space at home as well, right? Having escape from debate as well is very important, because you at one day, like potentially when you guys graduate, not all of you guys are going to stay in the community, right? So you're going to have some kind of random void when you go to college or when you're working, and you're going to need people to fill that void outside of debate. Find friends outside debate. Very important.
Yeah. Yeah, those are really great responses. A lot of you talked about like safe spaces and the ways in which debate has been like really helpful. But I know for a lot of people, debate doesn't really provide exactly the most safe space. So I just wanted to ask a slightly more serious question. When there are situations where you felt a little unsafe at tournaments or debate camps or in any debate-related setting, but didn't necessarily have explicit support, what did you try to do to make that experience a little more manageable for you, or at least be able to deal with a lot of the problems that might happen when debate does become too toxic?
I can start. Okay. So one of the things that I did at tournaments, like when I experienced that things, like, so at debate tournaments, I was a policy debater, so I have experienced a lot of anti-blackness, and I haven't told anyone this, but like a lot of times after debate rounds, I would cry. Like I would go in the bathroom and I would cry with my partner, because a lot of times those, like certain things affect you in greater dynamics than you think it happens, right? LDers obviously won't know like the actual nice things about having a partner. Some people can't stand partners, but even if you don't have a partner at LD, right, it's important to find that teammate, or it's important to like find that safe place. Whoever was in my Equity Day workshop knows that like sometimes it's important to acknowledge that safe spaces sometimes need to include like certain different dynamics, and as you like as debaters, and I know this is something that's important, like how can I change these one little things, right? A good example is before this time I couldn't stand Omegathon. I thought Omegathon was just useless. I hated doing physical activities. I hated it, right? And then at this session I fell in love with my lab, and I fell in love with their energy. So then they wanted to win Omegathon, and I wanted to win Omegathon too, right? So it's like little dynamics like that that it forces you to want to do better, right? It forces like other people to do better. And I know you're like, well, it's just me, right? Other people think the same way. So when you try to change the structure, it will eventually just follow suit.
Can I also just say that if you've gone through today and learned all of this new stuff you didn't know was happening on the circuit, or learned all of these new bad situations you had never heard about before, or like these anecdotes scared you, one of the best and most concrete, easiest things you can do is that if you have friends who you're going to see at tournaments during the year, or you have teammates who you're around all the time, this safe space can exist within your team, and that can be provided by you, right? So if you have people who identify as girls and they deal with sexism in a round, or they come back and they're confused, or you have people who are marginalized and they face racist comments, things like that, be open to listening to them, talk to them, tell them that those things aren't okay, encourage them to talk to like a coach or talk to somebody at the tournament, things like that. But actually acknowledge those situations, be somebody who can be talked to, because that can make a huge difference in comfort levels. If you know people who live near you, who go to VBI, maybe have a smaller team, keep in contact with them, like ask them how they're doing, do all of those things.
Can I add real quickly?
Yeah, and then
okay, real quick. I know that sometimes a lot of people are in places where they won't see people who are at tournaments, right? A lot of the times that I used to do is I would call my friends who I met at VBI or that I met at camp, and so I would just like find a secluded area if I was having a panic attack or I was crying, I would call a friend. And usually they know exactly what you're going through, or at least they can console you until the next round or until something happens. And those resources are, like, even if you don't have someone in person, you can always find someone through social media, because we live in a very technological world.
It's really important to add that you really need to seek like real professional medical help, like if these things lead to like traumatic experiences, because we keep talking about like friends and trusted adults. If you feel as though like it's at a certain point where you need to see someone, or if you're like at my rule is that like if you question it, you got to go see about it, right? So if you're questioning about like the issues that you're experiencing, maybe it's time for you to see someone. And a lot of times just like guidance counselors, right? Even though they're like, guidance counselors, but guidance counselors are like really good outlet for those type of things. If you don't want to talk to your parents about those things, guidance counselors are a really good thing.
Yeah, exactly. And just emphasizing also the presence of like there are other adults who can also create a sense of accountability. If you ever do feel unsafe at tournaments, you'd be surprised how many coaches actually are willing to care about the students that they're coaching and will be an advocate on your behalf. Oftentimes when things that happen at tournaments either put your mental health in danger or they put your physical being in danger or things along those lines, reporting it to a fellow coach or someone who has judged you and has been like a great influence on you will produce a lot of results in terms of generating accountability, because remember, you're a child and you don't necessarily have to deal with that. You shouldn't you shouldn't have a community that forces you to deal with that. So if you feel like there is someone in the community, and I feel comfortable saying if you see me at tournaments, feel free to have me deal with that issue so you don't have to. You focus on your rounds, you focus on those ballots, you focus on doing you, but you have adults who will willingly speak on your behalf and handle that situation for you. Yeah.
So I think more equally as important as like having friends. Like I know I debated like my best friend and I were on the team, and like if she wasn't, probably would have quit. We were just like always together. But also be a friend. Like there are some people who go to tournaments and they don't know anybody, or just like talk to people before your rounds or like after them. Like they beat you, it happens. But like you could still like meet really great people that like otherwise you might ignore. Or like if you see someone sitting alone, just like ask them if you can sit with them. Like we're all people. And also finding a trusted adult, as I think a lot of people have echoed, is really important. So like my coach would not trust him with anything at all whatsoever. And so I was lucky to have a friend to support me, but also finding like adults, and usually they happen to be like young women like in the community who judge, or just like someone at a tournament that you feel like you have some kind of trust in. Maybe it's a judge that you felt was like really nice to you and gave you really good comments, or maybe it's like a coach of another team and you're like close to some of the people on that team and they're your friends. Like tell somebody if something has happened, and encourage people to, like if something happens to your friend, encourage them and be supportive of them and suggest that they also tell a trusted adult, or just any adult, because there are a lot of situations that need to be handled and should not be on you to handle them. So I think like everyone on staff can be considered a trusted adult, like your mentor, people you form bonds with. Like there's going to be one person from VBI staff at the vast majority of tournaments you will attend, whether it's on your local circuit, less so on your local circuit, but still. Catch me if you're on the local Illinois circuit, or national circuit tournaments, that like we're there for you and we will advocate for you. Never feel like you're inconveniencing someone by telling them something that is very important. And even if you think like, oh, maybe it's not that important, like maybe it's not a big deal, I still would encourage you to like come forward and just tell a trusted adult, and then you can talk through it together and they can elevate that situation if necessary.
Cool. After this next question, opening up the floor for the last time, because we are unfortunately kind of out of time, or approaching being out of time. So opening up the floor for any specific questions you've had about dealing with some really difficult issues in debate, be it like being attacked by like maybe a particular judge or a adult in the community. How do you approach those particular situations? Things along those lines. But the last question that I had before we we open it up to the floor is, what have you all, if at all, have been thinking about in terms of creating more accountability in debate? A lot of times people want to talk about how we have a general obligation to kids or a general obligation to creating good education systems, but no one really follows it up with a notion of accountability to make sure people recognize that they can't really treat children in the community in a particular way. So what methods, if any at all, has the panel been thinking about in terms of dealing with accountability in debate?
One of the things that I think that is really important is if you see something, say something, right? Obviously, sometimes it's hard to pick and choose who to say that something to, but if you find a safe person to tell, or like whether it's your friend or not, it may not even have an implication towards you. It's important that you speak up at all times, because a lot of times, just like y'all are scared to ask questions, just like you're scared to participate and act like and engage with certain things, the people that are experiencing those type of issues also feel the same exact type of way. So sometimes you may not experience anything at all, but you see something, right? It's important to speak up, and it's important to always say something, regardless of who you say it to, right? Make sure it's a trusted and perfect person. And also, we keep telling you about telling and doing this. Make sure you're not the problem, right? Make sure you're holding yourself accountable for the actions you do. Check yourself a lot of times. Make sure you think about the things that come out your mouth before you say it. Think about the jokes you say. Think about the shows you watch. A lot of those things have implications that we don't even know what's happening to those things. And I think that like that's important. And one thing that I can pretty sure say, like, if you're experiencing something at VBI or like a debate camp, I've experienced it firsthand where VBI takes in control of it and actually nips in the butt and actually has those issues and conversations. And if it's something that's happened at debate camp, you can always go to the office staff. If it's something that happens at a debate tournament, right? A lot of times the tabulation room is a good place to go to report those issues to, and they will help you to the strongest possibility that they can. And if not, always message me. I would be the first one to go on a rant for any of you, right? About any little thing, whether they had broccoli, but it wasn't cooked well. I will go there for you. Broccoli is just not the wave, right? So ensure that you hold yourself accountable if anything.
And if you're...
You and then Rebecca, yeah.
If you're in a round and your opponent or opponents are being like discriminated against in some way, or there's an RFD that seems questionable, that's the kind of thing you can point out to your opponent after a round, right? You can point it out to the judge if you really feel like that's something you can do. But if that's too hard, you can still talk to your opponents. That doesn't mean you have to like forfeit the round. You don't have to be like, you take it, you should have won. You can just be like, hey, I don't think that what was said was really that fair or okay, and I think there was something wrong with that. Maybe you should talk to someone like a coach or tab room or something like that, because in a lot of situations when that happens, it's very isolating, and if you hear from somebody else that that was wrong, it makes you a lot more confident, and it helps with that person if they want to go into that accountability. So a really big part of that is just acknowledging when you see something wrong and like telling other people about it.
Mm-hmm. Something we haven't really talked about is cyberbullying and flame wars, which like the oldie community is like in love with. I had like the most horrific time my senior year after I started winning a lot, and people started saying the nastiest things about me on online forums. Like grown men would be writing mean things about me, which is like super creepy. But like I think that forums, like debate forums on websites, have now become better moderated, which I think is great. But I think that those conversations have just migrated to Facebook. I don't think people have flame wars on Instagram really. There's one every month, right? It's like, what's the new Facebook gossip now? And that's just like petty. I get it, like debaters are argumentative people. Everybody just loves jumping into dog fights that they have nothing about because it's fun and interesting. But like, unless you are in the room, like you have no stake in that. You should not be talking about it. You should not be commenting on things that you don't know anything about, and you definitely should not be commenting about debaters, especially in situations where you have no knowledge of, right? Like things that are discussed in flame wars online are things that should be happening between the individuals, like over email, privately, they're serious, or otherwise they're just too petty and like should not be discussed at all. So if you have ever felt the impulse to like carefully read through or like comment on a debate flame war that is offensive to somebody, that is potentially hurtful, just don't, right? And like shut down people who are doing it. And if it really crosses the line, then you should obviously report it to an adult. But like, just resist that impulse. I know it's fun and I know gossip is great, but it really hurts people, and you don't know how people feel who are on the receiving end.
And go ahead. And a side note that like this is not just about debate. Like if you see it outside of debate, you should also still speak up. Like because I know these things are concentrated in debate because even though we're a large community, we're a small community. But even outside, school, home, neighbors, friends, anything, grocery store, speak up, right? Because you don't never know what happens after that, and you don't always want to be that one person like, if I would have, I should have, if I could have, I would, right? Don't do that. Just do it in and at that moment.
All right, I'm going to take 2 responses from the audience before we close out, or like 2 from students, please. I'm sorry. If no student raises their hand, sure, but which student? Oh, again? Okay, so you talked like twice. Yeah, you. Yeah.
So I like read a lot, and in particular, I've read a lot of authors like Stokely Carmichael, who talks a lot about like avenues for change. And one thing that I find really interesting about specifically his writing is the idea that whatever oppressed group needs to take its own agency and needs to control its own agency, and that it's not enough, for example, for white people to generate reform for minorities. Like those minorities need to generate their own reform. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on that kind of argument. I guess the closest thing that's, I guess, like importing that into debate would be like, how do you feel about allies like running case for awareness or something like that? I guess I'm a PF debater, so I'm not 100% sure how that would work, but like, I would love to hear your thoughts on that.
Answer that. I was just coaching at PFTAC, where this issue came up almost every round. I was teaching a lot of Asian American students from other countries. I'm a big fan of delivering teachable moments when you have the opportunity to. And I think, like your comment, right? Like, I think I would encourage you to practice the ability to tell when you have that in your head, like that's kind of racist, that's kind of right. Feel empowered to tell that person, even if it's in the room, even in public. And you have no idea how many times judges have told me, hey, I heard that, and I'm just waiting for that person to kind of state the objection. You don't have to run a critique, right? But you can even use that as saying, this is a demonstration of the argument I'm making in the round. They made this assumption. That's a big problem in policy, blah, 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 blah. So even if that means if these are the kind of topics that you're facing consistently, you have infinite rep time. Right? Think about how you react and respond to those situations and be ready for those situations if they're going to come.
Yeah. So it's not necessarily just a matter of like speaking for others, because obviously, you know, people of color and people who are oppressed are doing their work, right? Like Shania just came up here talking about the ways in which a bunch of women in debate are trying to find ways to make debate more equitable for women. But that doesn't mean just stand around and do nothing. It means you need to be an accomplice. You need to be donating to those things. You need to be participating in conversations. You need to be checking people, right? That agency needs to be coupled with people supporting those who need to make debate a more equitable space. So it is a two-way street, or it's a relationship that happens over time and can be developed, but it's not just on one person or the other.
Yeah. Furthermore, I don't think that I'm not seeking allies, right? My thing is like, I'm not looking for you to help me with my whatever the case is, right? So instead of being like, hey, I'm an ally, I'm affirming myself as an ally, act. Take agency on your own end, right? When you see discrimination, you see injustices, you do something to like stop those things, right? If you think black people or like Latinos or whatever the case is not doing enough, right? That doesn't mean you need to call them and be like, hey, as an ally, how can I support you? Sometimes they don't want to do anything. Sometimes they don't have anything to do because they don't have the power, right? So as an ally, or people who want to assume the role of ally, don't tell us you're an ally. Show us.
There is no more student. I will take Emmy as the last person. Oh, sorry, there's a student. Oh, which one? Oh, but you've talked twice.
Right there.
Yeah, I know.
I wanted to quickly mention that there's like a lot of Facebook groups that people can use to also answer questions like the things that we've been discussing on the panel. Specifically, I know that this is something we talked about before, but for Asians in Debate, there's actually a Facebook group called Asians in Debate, and it talks about not just things like the way Asian culture, the way that family culture operates with things like debate arguments and things like multiculturalism, but also how things like Asian culture operates with blackness, how the model minority myth would operate with the way that anti-blackness operates and the way that Asian people have assimilated to that. There's a lot of links on that page, and there's a lot of articles and websites that they send you to, so I recommend like not just Asians, but anyone in this room who wants to learn about that to join that group.
Right, yeah, definitely. So in case anyone didn't hear, sorry, oh, yes. In case anyone didn't hear Sai, VBI, they were just talking about how there are a lot of Facebook groups that also will be able to answer a lot of the questions and provide you with the community that maybe we can't do so in this like hour and a half time that we had. But you definitely have access to those resources. As was mentioned on the panel various times, lots of people use the internet. Lots of people love technology, which means that you probably will be able to find people in the debate community who see a lot of things very similar to you and can also provide you with some extra support. So it seems very pressing right now. Okay, so last thing, and then we'll close up the panel.
So for context, like my parents only saw debate as like a tool to get to college, and they like didn't care if I cared about it or anything of that sort. And, like every week they'd be like, did rankings get updated? Did you go up? Like, why did you go down? If you need to give us reasons why your rankings will go up before we let you go to this tournament, or like after the first day they'd like text me, and if I was like 2-2 instead of 3-1, they'd start pressuring me to drop out because they'd be like, you're not gonna get the bid, your rankings are gonna go down, and that's like really bad. And like once all my apps ended, they just didn't want to send me to tournaments at all because they were like, well, college process is over, so like it doesn't fucking matter. So my question is like, for students in that situation, how do you turn debate into something positive or like a safe space? If you know that if you choose to like, actually like get sleep instead of like staying up until 4 cutting blocks and freaking out, you'll do worse and you'll come home and you'll like get yelled at for something.
I think that's we see you, we hear you type one. Yeah, so we're gonna do that again. We see you, we hear you. I think that is very important to note that like sometimes debaters are in debate because they don't want to be. And I'm sorry that like sometimes you're too young to make like pressing demands against your family members. But this is the point of time, like instances like that may cause you your mental health. It's time for you to seek professional help, as in like a guidance counselor or someone that is a trusted adult that will talk to your parents as a parent, like an adult to adult conversation, right? Because obviously signs like that are like can be like a sign that like you're nearly on the edge, right? And I'm so sorry that you had to go through that, Amy. But sometimes if you do enjoy debate and that like sometimes people just pressure you into debate, you need to maybe try to have a conversation with your parents and explain to them like, hey, even your coaches, sometimes coaches are guilty for this too. But you need to have a conversation and say, hey, I do debate for the fun of it. And sometimes if it's no longer fun, then I'm going to do none of it, right? And I think that that's important. And it sounds like it sounds easier than done. I don't know how that goes, but it sounds easier than like how it actually functions in reality. But if that doesn't work, just automatically go to a trusted adult, someone, an official school member, school administrator. At that point, it's time for you to tell on your parents. Like at that point, it's time to tell on your parents.
Mm-hmm. Last comment, and then yeah.
Okay. I guess like briefly, kind of if you guys are pressured into debate and you don't want to be here, like hopefully quit, right, if you don't want to do it, but also just try to make debate fun, right? There are so many things that you can do with debate. There's so many types of debate and so many things that you can relate to. So even if you have pressures, either from coaches or from your parents, just trying to make it more fun and relating it to you. Like I watched you debate. I mean, like you were amazing, and I know that you made it your own thing. So like trying to do things like that can maybe help you like want to retain being in the community.
Yeah, cool. All right, that concludes our time. All right, so before you get dismissed, a couple of things, right? Number one, as we said, today isn't just to like reveal the fact that there is like inequity in debate. I'm sure by this point a lot of us understand that, but it was also to allow for you to be aware of these issues so that way you can think of ways to either come up with survival strategies or allow for you to create spaces for other people to be able to find ways to exist in this community in ways that are healthy, productive, safe, etc. So within probably the next hour, there is going to be a button on the camp portal that will allow for you to submit ideas for what you think we should do about equity in debate, because it really at the end of the day is about what you as students think we can do. We always talk about it from the perspective of coaches, we always talk about it from the perspective of admin, but you all are the ones who are in the rounds. You are the ones who are usually chilling in the hallway, which means you have the ability for you to come up with a lot of solutions, and you should recognize the power that comes from within you and the ability for you to be able to generate evaluate those different things. So if that is a useful resource for you and you really want to make your voice heard, that is going to be up for until the end of camp. We really implore you to use it. We're planning on using it for a series on V Briefly where student voices are allowed to talk about the ways in which we address equity and debate. So that is definitely something you should use. The second thing is that instead of going back for mentor check-in, a lot of you can end up checking with your mentors here. So don't just rush off. Probably check in with where your person is. Finally, almost done. Finally, a lot of you did not get to either express something or ask a particular question. If you also end up using that button early enough, some of us can like generate responses to the things that you would have said that we didn't really get the time to. Or if you really want to express something that just didn't get touched upon, that is the time for you to be able to express it. We're only like a few people, but you are so many people and you have so many perspectives. So definitely feel free to do that as well. But yeah, thank you.
Also, when you're leaving out, watch out for Lauren's core. Oh, never mind.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. Bye.